Krystal, you flagged the story. I'll set it up a little bit. I'm really curious to hear what you think about Biden, Biden and the DNC, honestly, writing off New Hampshire, bypassing it, changing their process such that South Carolina comes first, basically to rig the primary because they know that Iowa and New Hampshire actually didn't choose Biden last time, and Iowa gave them the perfect excuse. They're like, oh, well, it was such a shit show last time. We have to bypass it. But that didn't mean you had to bypass New Hampshire, where Biden conveniently got 5th place. But South Carolina, where we have a large elderly black population, which votes very, very differently than Iowa and New Hampshire. Yeah, let's just throw it to them because of racism or whatever. Well, now, though, it seems, even though the New Hampshire primary will continue, let's put this please up on the screen, the Biden team, look, it seems to be panic in a certain way.
Yeah.
They are now instituting, after Dean Phillips has announced his candidacy, a, quote, weird write-in campaign where they want Biden to win New Hampshire, but they don't want to seem as if they are all that invested in him winning. Because Biden, by trying to end the, quote, 100-year reign as the nation's first in the primary and put South Carolina first, now his allies are trying to make it so that he will have a write-in campaign on a shoestring budget where his campaign is not technically involved, but they still really, really want him to win because it would be embarrassing, which it would be embarrassing for you to lose to Dean Phillips, to Marianne Williamson, or previously RFK Jr., who had been vying for, if we think about the RFK Jr. case before he went independent when he was in the Democratic Party, his entire thing was New Hampshire because that was the one place where Biden's not competing. He's literally not there. And if RFK was able to win for 40, 50, or whatever percent, that would have been humiliating. And the media would have had to treat that as a story. In this case, now we've got Dean Phillips, who's got, some momentum. It's unclear exactly how much. They seem to be pulling like a fast one, both trying to tell the media, New Hampshire primary doesn't matter, all of this, Biden challengers, they're fake. That's why they're rigging the whole election process in the rest of these states. But now they also do want to win to try and save face in terms of their headlines.
Basically, by being so heavy-handed in trying to rig the Democratic primaries, they screwed themselves. They really screwed themselves. They thought New Hampshire would fold and would just get in line. And then they would be able to have the, exact state order that they want, that they thought was ideal for Joe Biden. But they didn't think through the fact that, number one, this is like a point of pride and a source of identity and money, by the way, for the Democratic Party in New Hampshire. They didn't want to let this go easily. And the other thing is the New Hampshire Constitution says that they go first in the nation. And New Hampshire is not run by Democrats. It's run by Republicans. Right. So even if they wanted to change it, they're not in control to change it. So they're saying, okay, we have to abide by our state laws. So we're going forward with this primary, whether you're participating or not. So that's what put Joe Biden in this quandary of like, okay, well, since the DNC isn't sanctioning this thing, and in fact, they're penalizing the candidates in the state if whoever wins the state isn't going to get any delegates. So Biden can't put his name on the ballot. So they have to do this write-in effort. But they're also worried that, all of this anti-Biden sentiment that is very clear within the Democratic Party, where people really feel like they want another alternative, and which has been amplified and exacerbated by the fact that so many young people are disgusted with his unconditional support for Israel's all-out assault on Gaza. That has opened them up to a very precarious situation. They don't want to be seen as spending any money in New Hampshire. So the state party, which is, by the way, incredibly pissed at the DNC and incredibly pissed at Joe Biden, they've sort of begrudgingly taken up this effort. It's a very low dollar amount in terms of presidential politics that they've put into this write-in effort. And it's a real wild card what's going to happen here because it's hard to poll, right? How do you poll what's going to happen in a write-in campaign? Are you asking people, okay, here's your options that are on the ballot, Dean Phillips, Marianne Williamson, or some other write-in? Are you sort of like pushing them with the fact that you can write in Joe Biden? Are people going to be aware that that's the case? I just think it's even more difficult to predict what will happen here. And the irony is, Saagar, if they had just played this straight, kept New Hampshire at the front of the line as it's, always been in terms of the first primary, Joe Biden was going to win. He was going to win. He's winning in every other state. Absolutely. He would win in New Hampshire. And even, maybe somebody would do a little bit better than they're going to do in other states. But because they are so concerned and so nervous and so overly controlling of this process and so opposed to actually having real democracy and letting people have a say and go to the ballot box and actually pick, they have opened themselves up to a vulnerability. So I genuinely don't know what's going to happen in New Hampshire for Democrats. We can put this next one up on the screen. I mean, the polls have been, again, a little bit all over the map, I think, in particular, because it's very difficult to poll this write-in situation. But there was a poll that had Dean Phillips at 26%. That's not nothing. I think even that level of support is embarrassing for an incumbent president versus a guy. I mean, nobody knows who Dean Phillips is, right? I mean, we've interviewed him here. We know who he is, but he's a random congressman that the overwhelming majority of the country has no idea who he is. And the media has gone to great lengths to make sure nobody knows who he is. They've done the same thing, obviously, to Marianne Williamson. And then you couple that with there's also a new effort to write in just the word ceasefire on the ballot to try to send a message to Joe Biden. I mean, I think probably the more effective way to send a message to vote for one of his actual opponents who's on the ballot. I think Dean and Marianne at this point both support a ceasefire and have some differences from Joe Biden on their policy towards Israel. But that just adds another factor, motivating young people to go out and send some sort of a signal against Joe Biden. So it makes it a little more interesting than Iowa. Nothing happened for Democrats, but it makes it a little more interesting than some of the other states.
It's more interesting because we genuinely have no idea. I mean, like you said, it's already difficult to poll a write-in. Number two, people aren't spending any money on polling the Democratic race. We have one, maybe two. At this point, it's, super PACs are the only ones with any cash. I mean, if we look to history, and we think about, a competitive primary, even a sitting president. The last time this happened was 1980 election. Jimmy Carter only won 47% in the New Hampshire primary. Ted Kennedy actually got 37% of the vote. So let's say that Dean Phillips gets 26-30. I mean, that's a serious contender. But I could flip it and, again, just point to if Biden had any confidence in himself, he would do what Carter did, and you would try and crush your opponent in the primary. Carter maintains he has some cope where he's like, well, Ted Kennedy really hurt me going into the election. I'm like, dude, Ted Kennedy was the least of your problems whenever it was going into the 1980 election against Ronald Reagan. It's not that it didn't cost too much money. Money wasn't your problem. The thing is, I actually think it helped him, having read a little bit about it. He had to hone his message, both in terms of getting people to come out for a vote for him, and he was in fighting shape. If we'll remember Obama's first debate against Romney? Disaster. And the reason why was, what did all the people around him say? He's out of practice. He hasn't run for office in a long time. He's like, he kind of forgot that you need to make a case. His second debate was very, very different. He tried to reform his professorial tone and getting angry. That was the real Obama. Was the only time we ever really saw him was in that first debate. And then he put the mask back on. But the point is that, it's healthy. It's good for you. And actually can make you better at overall running for office. There's also just a question about the media in this primary. We talked and had looked previously, Vivek Ramaswamy was saying like, oh, look, they're leaving me out of polls and they're not putting my face on the screen. You and I are familiar with this going back to the Yang Gang, how many times Andrew Yang was left off, how many times he was either blackballed or not mentioned by the media. I mean, in the case of Dean Phillips, there's some crazy stuff, actually. Let's put this up there. So Dean Phillips says that he has not been on MSNBC a single time since he has announced his candidacy. Phillips here, this was an interview with Politico, he says he may as well be calling in from the sidewalk outside of the Capitol Hill studio. He can watch fancy guests come and go, hoping in vain for Chris Hayes, Joy Reid, or Jen Psaki to just bring him in from the cold. He says, quote, right-wing media has actually been more than invitational. By contrast, I don't think there's an MSNBC viewer that even knows I'm a congressman, because that is what is being portrayed in designed to prevent that education. Now, look, let's be clear. He doesn't have a right to go on MSNBC. But then there's a question with MSNBC. They're not stupid. They know they run the table in terms of elite Democratic opinion. You can't even have the guy on one time. So according to them, the Phillips campaign, they said that they had 2 previously scheduled appearances. This was actually on CNN. Then both of them were subsequently canceled. MSNBC has not even reached out to the man. You have interviewed him twice. And it's like, it's not that hard. You can just text him, people.
It's very available.
Let's think about this, from their low-rated shows, even and all of that. Joy Reid or any of these other people. What the hell else are they covering on the show? Why pretend? Just have him on. You can even be confrontational as you were. Dean, look, I'm going to give him credit. He sat there and he took it. You went back and forth with you guys. That's pretty rare, actually, for people who are running for president. I actually can't think of a better thing than to have somebody on like that, especially if you're Jen Psaki or someone. Challenge him to his face. What's the issue with that? They seem to be terrified at even opening the door, which is a huge mistake. It's a lot of disdain for the viewer, because a lot of these viewers viewers, they love Joe Biden. Or if they don't love Joe Biden, they're going to be offended because they're much more institutionalist than anybody would even challenge him. So by airing him, they more likely would turn people towards the Biden campaign. But at the very least, like, you got to let people talk. There's just no reason you shouldn't.
I guarantee calls went in from Biden World to MSNBC and to CNN, and I'm sure to other places as well. I mean, that's why he's getting booked on CNN and then canceled.
Yeah.
That's why the invitation is not even getting extended to MSNBC. And the way this works is someone in Biden World calls the president of the network and says, listen, we don't want this guy on your air. And if he does, you're not getting your interviews with the president. You're not getting your interviews with Kamala Harris or whoever it is that they want access to. It's not happening. And so that's the way this game works. And, you know, I saw it when I was at MSNBC and I did critical commentary of Hillary Clinton before she was going to run in 2016. And someone from Clinton World called the network. And that's basically exactly the message that was sent in no uncertain terms. So that's the way that this game is played. It's disgusting. It's not journalism. It's not, you know, it's anti-democratic, especially for these networks, CNN and MSNBC, that pretend they care so much about democracy. And think about it, on CNN too, they did town halls with all of the Republican contenders, even the ones that were polling at like 3%. They gave them plenty of airtime. They gave them plenty of exposure. So even if you look at the poll numbers here and you're like, oh, well, Marianne's not polling that high or Dean's not polling that high, they're polling high, a lot higher than some of the people they put on air for these town halls and gave them, you know, plenty of space and whatever. They've just decided to pretend there are no options on the Democratic side. And I'll tell you, Saagar, it's very clear from the way the Biden people have reacted. They fear that his support is a house of cards. Now, is it really a house of cards? I don't know. But they clearly are worried about that. And there's a reason for them. I'm not sure that they're wrong, I guess is what I'll say. If you genuinely had Dean Phillips, who I think presents himself reasonably well in interviews, even in, you know, a confrontational or like contentious interview like I had with him a couple of times, he comes across well, he's able to handle himself. And they're worried that if MSNBC viewers actually internalize there is another option here, basically like generic Democrat is actually on the table for me to choose, that they may go ahead and choose that option. And I'm not 100% sure that they're incorrect about that.
They may, look, I don't know. I actually do think Biden probably would prevail in a quote unquote primary as it's currently constituted. Just because I think a lot of viewers or a lot of voters are comfortable and, you know, especially
being an incumbent is a huge advantage. Huge advantage.
Yes, that's right. That said, you know, there's no reason not to give him a shot. And I think a point that you made was fantastic. Is if frickin' Tim Scott gets a town hall, Dean Phillips gets a town hall. If Mike Pence, who can't even drag his ass to the finish line in Iowa to actually run and go on the ballot, gets a town hall, well, then I think Dean Phillips should be able to get a town hall. It's pretty wild. It's interesting, too, the Biden campaign, to back up, you know, what you're saying. They were actually asked for comment on the story, whether they were quashing, and all they responded was, quote, lol, in all caps. It's like total disrespect at that. Very, you know, like very arrogant behavior for somebody who is terrified and is literally rigging the primary. So look, anyways, we can look at it. We could say it's a possible, because New Hampshire is the one place where they don't have it entirely rigged to their benefit. One thing we also know is that the New Hampshire Attorney General and most New Hampshire Democrats are so furious with the DNC, the New Hampshire Attorney General actually is threatening to take legal action against them because the DNC keeps saying that the New Hampshire primary is not real. And they're like, hey, you're violating state law because you're denigrating or whatever our process. So there is some internal fight here. The DNC's throwing everything they are at this. But overall, we just have to say this is really bad for the future, because what it means is that if they're going to commit to South Carolina first, there will never be a Barack Obama type figure ever again. Period. There will always, like, South Carolina and its political system are designed as machine politics. If that goes first, you deny the momentum stories that originally came out for Obama. And to put it back in history, if South Carolina was first, Barack Obama would never be president. Hillary 100% would have been the nominee. And who the hell knows? We're going to have freaking John McCain as president. Can you imagine that? If America wouldn't even exist. We'd be in a nuclear wasteland if something like that had ever happened.
So let me ask you this, Saagar. What do you think, how do you think the media handles it if Dean Phillips actually beats Joe Biden in New Hampshire?
They have to pay attention.
They have to cover it.
They have to pay attention.
I mean, I feel that way too. Like, they may want to do the blackout, whatever, but you can't just 100% ignore. They will definitely downplay. They will give you all the context in the world for why this doesn't count, and Joe Biden wasn't even competing, they didn't even spend any money there, blah, blah, blah. But I don't think that they can avoid just completely pretending like it didn't happen.
It looks like RFK. I mean, everybody wanted to pretend he didn't exist, and they got, you know, some 26% or whatever in a national poll, and they're like, all right, we got to do something on this. Like, even he gets to go on Fox News and all these other places. And what did he did an interview with ABC? Yes, they edited it, they, you know, censored whatever. But the point is, they still acknowledge that he was real. I think the same is going to happen with Dean if he wins. But if he loses, which probably looks most likely, well, then it's going to be a problem. But I still think if he does crack 25, you still got to interview the man. You have to interview the man. You have to give him like something, because 25% is a non-insignificant amount of people who came to the ballot box and are actually Democrats. You can downplay it all you want, low turnout, etc. But, you know, you have to at least acknowledge his presence. We'll see. I mean, to his benefit right now, he's got a lot of these VCs, you know, currently backing him. He's got the All In podcast. Jason Calacanis. He did a Twitter Spaces with Elon Musk and with Bill Ackman and with Dean Phillips. Bill Ackman actually gave Dean Phillips $1 million to his super PAC.
And then
the most
Dean took
that he's ever given.
off of his
That's
website.
a whole other conversation. But
this man is very impressionable.
It is not as if, you know, he doesn't have powerful people behind him ready to help if he's able to capitalize. The only question is if, you know, if that even materializes as possible, which I don't know. It's nobody knows.
Well, it'll be interesting.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.